Okay, so I'm Sophia Wiking. I'm a visual arts assistant here at the Attenborough Arts Centre. And I'm here with Daniel Cave today to talk about his exhibition here, the cave paintings, and his work in general.
Okay.
Yeah. So first I was wondering, there's quite a tactile element to a lot of your work, and I've heard several people who feel like they want to touch it. So I was wondering what role the different senses have in your work.
Well, making tactile surfaces, that's kind of, it all ties into the kind of way that I paint. So I don't really see it as a different kind of element in one piece. So it could have traditional painting techniques, 3D materials, and I guess that the materiality refers to the kind of real world, as opposed to, I guess, the kind of illusion of painting.
Yeah, and I mean, this idea of the real world, you have said that your paintings start with an observation, so something in the real world, I guess. What does the idea of an observation, what does it mean to you?
Well, it all starts out as a visual observation, so things that I've saw, but it kind of then develops from there. So because I don't paint, outside, when I see something, I have to use memory to kind of bring elements back in. So I guess memory is all part of observation as well.
So if you go back to the tactile idea then, so you start with a visual impression, would you then, and then you add the tactile afterwards to sort of affirm those ideas?
Yeah, and usually the things that I see I kind of turn into a strong visual form, and I guess making them 3D is another way of kind of making that image stronger or very clear to view.
But then it almost seems like you're still, vision is a sort of dominating sense, and the tactile is there to enforce the visual impression.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. Right, so some of the terms that you use to describe your process, there's inquiry, and the idea of transcribing, and also the idea of the hermetic. So with that in mind, what do you think, what is the role of the viewer to you?
Well, I guess the work works on figure-ground kind of relationship. So also combined with the 3D elements, I hope people they could piece together certain parts in the painting themselves. Obviously, because they're quite 3D, there's a bit of interaction as well with how a viewer might look at the work or think about the work.
So is the process of viewing it important to you? Is it as important as your process in creating it?
Because it comes from an observation that only really I can know.
Yeah.
It's not kind of a game of hide and seek of what the image is, but hopefully there's enough to go on for a viewer for them to kind of.
Yeah. So again, the sort of idea of transcribing. So you're trying to, would you say you're trying to convey your impression rather than the reality of it?
That's probably a good way of looking at it, because it is kind of my way of painting. So.
Yeah. So I've thought about the idea of encoding and decoding. How would you say that your process is about decoding reality or encoding it, if you understand what I mean?
That was a good question. I thought about that a lot. And, I thought of encoding and decoding. So decoding might be an underlying kind of certain way that things are, and encoding is starting off by making your own kind of rules, visual rules. So probably encoding.
Yeah.
Probably.
So you feel like you're maybe adding to reality, you're adding your own impressions, your own personality to something that's outside of you.
Yeah.
And then conveying that to someone else.
Yeah.
So could you give an example of such an observation and a process?
Yeah. So this piece called St John's Got the Blues, and it comes from an observation in Leicester, down the road from Attenborough Road, and it's on a street called St John's Walk. It's basically some office block buildings that have car parks underneath them. So if you see that location in this painting, there might be a clear kind of similarity between the two. And I've basically used my own way of using colour and the textual qualities to kind of bring the image out.
So how do you think how would you say it differs? What have you done to this observation?
Well, obviously, reality is a lot more detailed and a lot more kind of richer than the way that I've presented this image, but it was mainly the form of the building that I wanted to bring out, and I guess I've kind of isolated that image as well. But hopefully there is still something there that connects back to the original kind of image.
So it's a sort of subtracting and adding
yeah,
to bring out certain features.
Yeah, I guess that's part of like the artistic license, you could call it.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know where we are in the observation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, what you said again about observation and the idea of memory, I was thinking about the idea of temporality and time in your work, and maybe with the title Cave Paintings, and on one hand you have it evokes images of the sort of dawn of mankind, or sort of historical cave paintings, but also a very personal resonance, because obviously your name is Cave. So yeah, how would you say that the idea of time informs your work?
From a practical point of view, I guess because I work in a lot of layers rather than things coming together very quickly.
Yeah.
So time is an element to the work, but referring to the title, it's a bit of a silly pun on my name, but also I guess it kind of, you have an idea of what's painting value today. It's such an archaic way of making art, and I believe that it's still useful, still important. So I think just trying to convey that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it seems almost like a reflection of that, what we said, of having the observation, and you have this fixed moment in time that you go back to in a longer process and create this work of art, and then it's frozen almost a moment in time through that process. And the idea of cave paintings, going back to an early point in time and trying to recreate that in the present moment. And another element I think we've sort of touched upon already is the idea of abstraction. So, would you describe your art as abstract?
I don't kind of think about that kind of. I'm more interested in kind of the idea of realism or realistic, those words.
Yeah.
And I tend to ask those words more when I'm making a piece rather than, is this too abstract? Is it gone too far? And the kind of way I'm working with forms, but yeah, it's quite a problematic word, so it's a loaded one as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who see your work they'll think it's abstract. Yeah. But then again, it feels very tied down in reality in a way, again with the tactile, the sort of very material aspect. I mean, would you... I mean, because in art you have the idea of abstract art, so maybe your art is concrete art. I was thinking.
I'm not massively familiar with that.
Oh, that's just my own idea. Yeah, so what do you think the role of the concrete is on the other side then?
Could you expand upon
Well, I'm not sure I can. The idea of this very tactile and tied down in reality, and maybe also how, I guess one way of looking at it is the idea that it's not so tied down in art history as abstraction is. There's a whole, how would you say how do you position yourself in relation to art history, your predecessors?
Any painter that's still painting probably have a good idea of where the work fits in. And I think my work, it doesn't stray too far from a lot of contemporary painting that deals with materiality, painters that use a lot of paint.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, okay. But are there any particular artists that you feel are, specific, strong influences in your...
Paul Nash is probably the most important artist at the minute. I really like his writing, and he was also did a lot of photography as well, which a lot of people might not be familiar with. But he kind of works with natural forms in a similar way that I do. Also, an American painter called Thomas Noskowski, his kind of sensibility is very similar to mine. So he works from observation, very like mundane things that he sees, but he develops into paintings. So it's I like the way that he is inspired. There's similarities between that.
Well, so you said that with Nash, that his writings have inspired you. So could you develop that a bit?
Well, he made it's kind of an autobiography. It was meant to be in two halves, but obviously he died before he'd actually written out the second half of it. But the way he talks about the natural landscape and things that he kind of saw the world in quite characterful ways. So a lot of his pieces are about trees, things like that. But the way he uses the forms, it just resonated with, I guess, the way that I look at the world as well.
Yeah. So would you say it's, to what extent do you think it's the way he writes, to what extent the content of it, like specific ideas, or is it both of it?
Yeah, I mean, his writing, he does like show a love of nature and the landscape from an early age. But just the way that it is he really wanted to connect with the surroundings. And I just found it really interesting. If you would see his work and not know anything about him, it's quite odd.
Yeah.
Lots of unusual colours in his work. And it was just interesting to find out this kind of simple inspiration that's actually behind it.
So do you think those ideas have been more influential than the direct visual side of his work?
I've developed the way that I kind of paint and draw before I'd read a lot of his stuff.
Yeah.
It just kind of strengthens your interest in certain artists when you find more about them.
Yeah. Okay. And that's, again, it feels like it's relating back a bit to the idea of encoding or decoding. It's almost like you're using that biographical information to decode his work.
Yeah,
maybe.
in a way, yeah. Because I guess he was considered a surrealist at the time, especially in terms of what else was going on in painting.
Would you consider him a surrealist?
Not really. I think he's a landscape painter, but his own imagination comes into it quite heavily. I don't know.
So again, it's a bit like your work and the interaction between reality and your own mind, your own perceptions.
Yeah.
Would you? Yeah.
no matter how far he goes with something, like the different elements in a piece, I kind of go along with it because I know that it's probably a visual kind of inspiration that's behind it, so it's, I don't know.
Yeah, so you mentioned with Paul Nash and the use of colour, and the use of colour is something that also springs out quite a lot in your work.
Yeah.
How do you think about colour?
Again, comes from observation really, and there's certain pieces that colour-wise they stay similar to the original colours of the scene, and other times, I guess it's more kind of I'm choosing colours to sort of like heighten certain elements of it, and I guess that's where a lot of the bright colours come in, because it's a way of kind of separating elements in a piece, just using colour rather than form.
Mm. Separating elements.
So there's like some bits might refer back to like the real colours.
Yeah.
And some might be quite intuitive.
Yeah.
So I just like I'll pick a colour because it sticks out from everything else in the piece.
Mm.
And I guess I know that's going to kind of register with the viewer when they're looking at it.
Yeah. How, to what extent do you think? How do you think that might translate? Do you think, to what extent do you think your ideas of colour, carry across to the viewer? If you understand what I mean.
I guess it could get lost in a way. Colours are so subjective that people's opinions on certain colours might find it repulsive, or they might find it interesting visually.
Yeah. Sort of polarising in a way.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Going out to the extremes of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you have any good examples around here that you could talk us through?
Well, this piece, for instance.
This one here.
Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of circular forms in it. So the base layer was a very bright blue, and I knew that when I put layers on top of it, that I'd be bringing these circles out.
Mm.
So in this case, the blue doesn't refer to the real location, what it was, but obviously against the tone of the other colours in the top layers, it's a very kind of contrasting.
It's almost a bit like a synesthetic. I think maybe that's sort of something that feels like it resonates through a lot of your work.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going back to the tactile as a way of communicating visual. We're using colour to communicate shape.
Yeah.
It's that sort of conflation of different senses.
Yeah. I mean, when I make a work, or when I see something that interests me, I tend to see almost like the finished thing in my head as soon as I saw it.
Mm.
And I guess it's kind of a backwards way of working, but I'm working to kind of make the thing that I can see in my head.
Mm.
That's quite an intuitive thing to explain, but I do see things like colours in my head that relate to certain images.
Mm. Yeah, so it feels like the process is something that's in between the observation and these two fixed points in time.
Yeah. I spend a lot of, usually that point in between is just like looking at work as it's being made, and I'll stare at work for quite a long time to kind of have this kind of figuring out, is it the original idea, and then does the actual piece kind of meet that idea yet?
Mm. Yeah. Well, another thing that is quite interesting, because we have here some of your drawings, and we have some of your paintings and the more sculptured works. What do you think is the difference? How do you think differently about those media?
Well, I guess paintings, obviously, they have their own material, that's like a big element of them. But the drawings do have a slight relief to them because of the way that I'm adding and taking away layers.
Yeah.
So I do use that in a similar way to how I might use washes of colour and then a 3D material, but it's a lot more subtle than that.
Yeah.
Certain pieces I think is like good for a painting, is like interesting. Some of the others are more, they're kind of like studies. So I do them on paper. And I guess they're a bit freer. The forms and the way that I make the piece on paper are kind of experimental.
Yeah, I mean, so for you, it's quite similar. I mean, from a viewer's perspective, looking at the finished product and thinking back to this idea of materiality and reality, you do have a bit less about, I guess, without that sort of tactile element.
Yeah.
But you can also see it's there on a more ideal level almost. Because you do work a lot with layers, and you sort of see through layers of paint, and so it feels like then they're really quite similar when you think about it.
Yeah.
Even though the immediate impression might be more different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain kind of ways, the ways that I make a painting, I kind of know how to make my paintings, and the drawings are similar, so I go through a process that's the same on each one. And I suppose there is a bit of repeating in the way that I use forms, this kind of character. It's probably a both drawing like
I mean, just looking at the work that's here, I know we have a bit more colourful paintings on the exhibition, but there also seems to be, there's a bit less colour going on in the paintings than in the drawings.
Yeah, that's probably to do with just the materials that you use in like when you've got like obviously pastels, when you got them laid out, you can just like super quick pick out, colours that just like you just think, oh yeah, I'll go for that one, and it's obviously quite a quick process, quite a frantic one. So I don't tend to think about colour as much as I would in a painting.
Okay.